Hi, I'm Karen Rispin. I'd like to tell you about some tools to provide valid evidence that your client is or is not in the right wheelchair. These were developed over a period of really 12 years now, connected with the LeTourneau University Wheels Project and now with the Assistive Technology Catalyst Project, which I lead. Our goal was to provide validated data to the manufacturers of wheelchairs intended for use in low-resource settings. To that end, we needed data to highlight structural issues that could be addressed. So we needed quite granular and specific data. And we wanted to do this for responses at two levels. One was, as I had said, the manufacturers. These are great not-for-profits. They're on very limited budgets. They're trying to make an impact around the world, and they need to know what's working. The other level was at the more clinical level, where validated data could provide evidence for necessary changes to the funding, for necessary changes to the structure of a wheelchair or the selection of the wheelchair or the modification of the wheelchair at the individual level. Initially, we had tried to use already existing outcomes tools for feedbacks to these manufacturers, and we were quite frustrated in the process because these tools are not intended for that purpose. We wanted to know what worked or didn't in the structure and the parts. So we tried, because we wanted to know how well the wheelchair provided mobility. We wanted to see how it moved. So we tried to use the wheelchair skills test. Well, that wasn't really intended for that. The wheelchair skills program teaches people how to be skilled with their wheelchair, and the wheelchair skills test measures that. It's not about comparing wheelchairs. It's about improving someone's skills and confidence. And obviously, people with better skill levels are going to do better than those who have a more challenging disability. That was also true with the functional mobility assessment. It's intended to measure a person's functional mobility so that those with more upper body function are going to get higher scores. And it's also not wheelchair specific. It didn't have the granularity to address parts of the wheelchair that might be causing problems. The same thing with the Quebec User Evaluation of Satisfaction with Assistive Technology. It gave the user a voice. But again, it wasn't wheelchair specific. And we also wanted feedback from other sources as well, from the clinicians who knew the most and had the big, broad understanding of what was going on, as well as the wheelchair users. We needed a level playing field for all wheelchair users so that those with higher upper body function wouldn't automatically get better scores for saying their wheelchair was suitable for them or working well for them. Rather than listing all possible parts of a wheelchair, we wanted to have tools that could be addressed for virtually all wheelchairs so we could get complete data sets. We needed it to be brief, simple, and clear to use. Therapists are busy. These are the ones who normally would be working with data collection, and they don't want to stop caring for people to spend a lot of time collecting research data. So it needed to be very brief and simple and clear. It needed to be a snapshot, because we didn't want to add on to their existing load in any way. So these tools are not the clinical records, they are research tools. So they needed to be snapshots. Many people we were working with, because this is designed for use in low resource settings, speak English as a second language, and they live in different cultural settings. So the language needed not to be culturally specific. It needed to be very clear and with the future goal of translation. And we have been translating into Spanish. And we needed a universally understood rating system, because someone who is not familiar with questionnaires may not have the same understanding of what the number 2 means. We wanted a universally understood and shared rating system. We needed to set it up so it was designed to discern difference well. It had high discriminatory validity. And for that purpose, we wanted quantitative data suitable for parametric analysis with ANOVA, where you could look for patterns. You could do 2- or 3-way ANOVA and say things like, are people with good upper body function happier with the function of their wheels or the wheelchair back? You can ask questions like that, because you can do that with 2- and 3-way ANOVA. We wanted to use mixed methods, so you had quantitative and qualitative data. So we would get a number from the quantitative data, and we could analyze that number, but we also wanted qualitative comments, where we could count the comments and find out why the numbers were high or low for a particular type of wheelchair. And when possible, we wanted to do, within subjects, data collection or repeated measures where we would look at a person compared to their self. And this was particularly true for the mobility tests. So it would reduce the impact of individual variation. We decided to use emoticons under the visual analog line as anchors. We had initially tried to use school grades, and that worked well for our initial studies, and you'll see that it's there in some of our papers. But when we started to use it in different locations, or there was other people interested in using it, who didn't share the same school grade system as my students and the students we were working with in Kenya and the teams in Kenya that were partnering with us, we realized we had to find something that was universally understood. Emoticons use the universal language of facial expression. The widely used the Wong-Baker pain rating scale uses them. So we decided to use them as well, using commercially available free emoticons to put under the lines. So this is the format that worked for our purpose. It was a visual analog scale format for quantitative data suitable for ANOVA, and different studies indicate that's usually the case, or often the case, and we, in each of the big data sets we collected in our studies, and you can find the publications online, we first tested the data for suitability for a parametric analysis, and it did produce data suitable for parametric analysis. We wanted a comment for each question to provide qualitative data. And with qualitative data analysis, the traditional way to do it is to sort the comments by commonly repeated topics, and you do this with an expert who is understanding the comments, and then put them into categories and count categories. We wanted a snapshot in time and brief, clear questions. And as you can see, here's an example from one of the, it says, rate the foot supports, front rigging, and other parts that support the feet and lower legs. And you mark anywhere along the line and just measure from the bottom to the mark on the line and give a comment expressing it. Here's how to score a question, where, as you can see, they've marked and they've given a comment. Here you take a ruler and you just measure from the bottom line to the vertical mark. And as you can see, this one happened to be at 6 centimeters, this one is 3.4, 2.1, and there's a comment under the line. Now, if you're only doing it for clinical use and you just want to use it for individuals for evidence, you can actually just put the questionnaire in their file and use it. However, if you want to use it for a larger study to say something with statistical analysis, you would then enter these numbers into a spreadsheet, and we'll show you some spreadsheets like that when we get to the individual measures. And I'm said individual measures because we found that we needed to separate some key questions about how wheelchairs function. We needed specific tools to focus with enough clarity to spark change. So we decided on 4 questions that we can answer with a team of undergraduates on a 3-week trip to Kenya in partnership with the clinicians and therapists. So we hope you'll find these tools used singly or altogether helpful in your practice, both in larger studies and especially to support evidence-based data that will facilitate the replacement or repair necessary for a wheelchair user. The wheelchair components questionnaire, is it broken? The wheelchair interface questionnaire, is it appropriate for the current user? The wheelchair satisfaction questionnaire, are the wheelchair users satisfied with it? And the aspects of wheelchair mobility tests, does it roll well? The first one I'm going to talk about is the wheelchair components questionnaire. This one simply says, is it broken? This gives light on the current maintenance condition. When you do studies of 30 or more wheelchairs of a certain type at a certain age, it can shed light on which parts typically break first. It can also shed light on the maintenance regime locally and whether or not the part can be obtained and repaired in low resource settings. It's available for free download at that link at our atcatalyst.org website. Here is the questionnaire. This one, unlike the other ones, is only about the wheelchair. It's just asking if a wheelchair is broken. And in this case, you can actually do it for wheelchairs that are in storage as well. You can see the questions at the top, the header here, which asks for some information, can be modified based on your own purposes. For example, if you had a study where you had another factor you wanted to use in your 2 or 3-way ANOVA, you could put that at the header if you wanted to. These are the factors we collected. We wanted to know the wheelchair type because we were giving feedback to manufacturers, which particular wheelchair it was, how many months it was in use, and here's the date, the location, assessor's name, and certifications. But you could add other things there as well. You could compare one maintenance regime to another at 2 locations or something like that as well. Here's the instructions. Indicate the current maintenance condition of the wheelchair by placing a vertical mark on the line, indicating your rating. Do not circle the emoticon faces. They are only for reference and placing your mark. The visual analog scale is intended to provide continuous data, so please mark anywhere along the line. Include at least one full sentence on the comment line that specifically describes the reason behind your rating. If there is evidence of past repair or replacement, describe it in your comment. Now, the example we gave here, because we didn't want to lead people, was completely something different. And with the example, it's a shoe. So here's the example of how to do it. Rate the left shoe, and they've given it a rating that's quite low. They're not super happy about it. And the comment is, the tread has been worn smooth. It's starting to come loose in spots, and it's been glued. Okay, so that's kind of an example of how to do it. And then it goes through the parts of the chair, only they're not listing every part. We tried to do that at first, and we realized we never got complete data sets, so we decided to make it user-centric. So it says, rate the seat, include the cushions and other parts supporting the hips, buttocks, and thighs. So this could be answered for a wheelchair that has a sling seat, or a wheelchair that has a cushion and hip supports, and even an adductor. And the comment would say what the problem is. Rate the seat back. Include the cushions and other parts supporting the back, trunk, and head. And again, here you could have a simple back or a very low back for someone with an active upper body, or you can have a back that is got trunk supports and a head support and so on. And you can answer it for those chairs. Rate the foot supports, front rigging and other parts that support the foot and lower legs, the frame, the structure holding the seat and back. Notice we've made the language very general, so if you're in a country where frame isn't an obvious word, we describe what it was. The casters, the smaller front wheels and their attachments, so this is the casters and bearings. This can be applied to a wheelchair with 1 caster, a 3-wheel chair, or 2 casters. Rate the main wheels and push rims. Rate the wheel locks and brakes and the wheelchair overall. Here's an example of scores from one wheelchair after 12 months of use, and as you can see, we've just stuck the numbers into Excel and generated the graph, so it's a visual. And here you can see that this wheelchair obviously isn't in great condition, but you don't exactly know why. And here's the comments. And this particular wheelchair was a Wheelchairs for Kids. It's kind of made like the Motivation rough terrain chair with 3 wheels, but it has some laterals and supports. And we did a group of those chairs, and the seat cushion is bottoming out and cracked. This is just one chair, so you can't make a statement for all Wheelchairs for Kids from this one chair. And we see that there's exposed metal on the lateral supports, the trunk supports, the foot plates are loose. Their frame, there's no grips on the push handles, but the frame is intact. The caster stem is loose and the wheel has cracks. The big wheel's the right wheel wobbles, and it's missing the left wheel lock. It needs repair. So we just found out something about this particular wheelchair. This could provide evidence that this child needs extensive repairs or a new wheelchair. But used in a larger group, it can provide meaningful feedback to the manufacturers of the Wheelchairs for Kids. And here is a set of just 5. We actually did it with more than that, but it got visually noisy, so I wanted to show you this. And as you can see, not all the wheelchairs are the same, but you begin to see a pattern. And under back, we saw repeated comments that the padding had come off the trunk support, so they were just like metal blades. And we were able to give that feedback to Wheelchairs for Kids, and they improved that. Caster, you can see that the ratings are low, and the comments indicated that very often the caster bearings were going very early in the lifespan of the wheelchair. And they also responded to that. This is a larger study. This is data from Free Wheelchair Mission Generation 2 chairs in a paper that's published. You can find this on our website. There's the reference. And you can see that they had difficulty with the foot plates between 3 and 15 months, it dropped drastically, and it was actually the attachments were coming loose. And we were able to provide that feedback to them in counted comments, and then they were able to respond to it, and they did so. This is just showing how a table can look with counted comments in ANOVA. For those of you who are academics, you can look at it more closely and interact with me about how to analyze data if you like. Here are 4 papers using the wheelchair components questionnaire. We validated it for content and construct validity, test-retest reliability, and inter-rater reliability. So it's been used in the field and validated. It's also being translated into Spanish using proper guidelines for translation, and is available in Spanish as well on our website. Okay, the next measure I'd like to tell you about is the wheelchair interface questionnaire. This is the one that I think is probably the most useful in collecting large data sets on wheelchair function, and it's one of the ones that we struggled the most to refine and make the right format to be really useful. It's answering the question, is this wheelchair clinically suitable for its user? It's intended for wheelchair professionals to complete. Ideally, it would be a therapist with wheelchair experience and training. It's available for download online in English and in Spanish at the www.atcatalyst.org website under resources. We need to emphasize very clearly with this one, because it is done by wheelchair professionals, that this is not a clinical assessment. This is a research tool. The purpose is to provide valid evidence that can support needed changes. And the needed changes are at 2 scales. One with wheelchair companies, which is what we were doing, to modify the design or confirm that the design is good. And the other is to facilitate funding for necessary changes, clinical changes for a wheelchair user. For example, does this wheelchair user need a different type of wheelchair for adequate mobility or for adequate postural support? This one does require a person. This is about the person in the wheelchair, really, and their wheelchair. And so unlike the wheelchair components questionnaire, this one, if you're going to use it in a study, requires, of course, subject consent and assent and all that ethical stuff to be done correctly. At the header, we put in the things that we wanted to use in different studies as ANOVA factors. We wanted to know the wheelchair type. We wanted to know the user's diagnosis, gender and age, how long they'd been in a wheelchair. We also wanted to know a little bit about their level of disability. Do they have arm control? Are they usually pushed? Can they sit up without help? We wanted to know the type of wheelchair, obviously, because we were trying to give feedback to manufacturers. This bit here, if you have a different thing you want to use for one of your ANOVA factors, there's no reason for you not to collect that data. And again, this is not meant to replace clinical records in any way. If you're already collecting the minimum uniform data set, this isn't replacing that. These are just the factors for ANOVA. The instructions at the top say indicate your professional opinion. Notice it says professional opinion. This is a questionnaire. It's not a checklist. It's your professional opinion of the user wheelchair interface as it is presently, based on your understanding of its current user's characteristics and living conditions. This is your professional opinion. If an interview is possible, it can be beneficial, but it is not required. We wanted to get full data sets, and very often wheelchair users may not be verbal or may not share a language with the wheelchair professional. Provide your professional opinion by placing a vertical mark on the line. Do not circle emoticon faces. They are only for reference and placing your mark. Mark anywhere on the line. See the examples below. Include at least one complete phrase on the comment line to describe the reason behind your rating. Be specific about situations or parts that you feel may be a problem. For mobility questions, answer as the user is most likely to travel either with or without assistance. If a question does not apply to the user wheelchair interface you were rating, do not mark on the line, but write NA in the comment section and explain why the question did not apply. So we ended up with 3 examples. Over time we realized we needed to give examples of how to answer in these different situations. Again, we're looking at a shoe because we didn't want to leave leading on any of the wheelchair parts, so we just use this shoe for example. Rate the fit of this person's shoe for their foot. They've given it a poor marking. They said the shoe is too short and narrow at the sides and toe pinch her foot. The next example for a different person, rate the fit of this person's shoe for their foot. There's no mark on the line. NA, the person does not have a foot. The third example, rate the fit of this person's shoe for their foot, has a very low mark, and it says this person does not have a shoe, but they need one. Their foot is often injured. So if they need a wheelchair part or modification and it's not there, you can still give it a low mark and indicate why. Here are the questions. As you can see, it's a brief questionnaire. The first questions are about pain and harm, centered on the person's body. We wanted it to be answerable for almost every wheelchair user. So the first one is rate how well this wheelchair prevents pain or harm to the user's head and trunk, from poor to excellent, to the user's shoulder, arms, and hands, to the user's hip, buttocks, and thigh, and the user's calves, ankles, and feet. So you can answer if they're missing bits they should have, or if bits are not appropriate, or fit is not appropriate for the different parts of their body. Rate the dimensions of this wheelchair for this user. Does it fit them? Rate this wheelchair's postural support for this user. And really only the therapists are the most able to rate postural support. You'll see when we look at the questionnaire that's for the wheelchair users, it's worded differently because they weren't be familiar with postural support, the phrase or the understanding that a clinician would have from their training in seating and therapy. Rate this wheelchair's facilitation of mobility across all surfaces and obstacles this user is likely to encounter. In other words, does it provide mobility on the surfaces they'll encounter outside or wherever? Rate the wheelchair's facilitation of mobility in small spaces. We found that this needed different wheelchair characteristics than rolling on rough surfaces. So we made it separately because also many people live in tiny houses and the workspaces or schools may be very space limited. Rate the wheelchair's facilitation of this user's daily activities at desks and tables. This was pretty universal. Almost everyone will use some sort of desk or table. Even people that may be mentally challenged have very limited upper body still can use a desk or table for some activities. Rate this wheelchair user's facilitation of social contact. Can they sit up and make eye contact? Is it moving them and giving them mobility in a way that lets them make the social contact? Rate the ease of transporting this wheelchair in or on a car, van, or other means of transport this user is likely to encounter. In some places, this is actually a limiting factor. If the wheelchair doesn't fold, they can't use it because they can't take it anywhere at all. In other words, it can only be in their house or in school. Rate the ease of transferring in and out of this wheelchair for this user without help of an assistant. And this one is also a very important and universal aspect. Obviously, there are other questions we could have asked, but we wanted to keep it brief and we wanted to give the ability to therapists to have a voice to wheelchair manufacturers to say what they see working and not working. Here's an example for one wheelchair and its user. This therapist rated the interface between a Modi Go and its user quite low. And here are the comments that explained why. The Modi Go is intended for children that need lateral support and have trouble sitting up, yet it has some limitations. And this is just for this one Modi Go and its user. To make a statement about Modi Gos in general, you'd have to do it with 30. And then you would only know for that location, and you would find out also if they're being prescribed correctly. But you find here, this one, the child is unable to use their arms and hands because there are no push rooms and a high center of gravity. The height causes instability. It's difficult to maneuver due to the length of frame. Chair is too high for a common desk, and in this particular case, the tray was broken. And it's hard to transport, and it's hard to transfer in and out of. But like I said, this is just one Modi Go and its user. To say anything about Modi Gos in general, you'd have to do a study with at least 30 chairs. Here are two of the papers validating it, and it's had both inter-rater reliability and construct and content validity papers published, and it's also been used in studies. This next one I would like to tell you about is a different aspect of wheelchair function. The wheelchair user themselves is really the only one that knows how the wheelchair impacts them in their daily life. Is it working for them? Are they happy with it? They don't have the broad base of understanding that the wheelchair professionals do. And there's a higher likelihood that they'll find more difficulty completing a questionnaire because of difficulty reading or writing or not sharing a language. So it's harder to get full data sets with this. But we thought it was incredibly important to validate an outcomes tool which would give the wheelchair users a voice to feedback to the wheelchair manufacturers. And those people we worked with were very excited about having a voice that could impact the design of wheelchairs. Here it is. And again, the stuff at the header was the things we thought were important for 2- and 3-way ANOVA in our studies. We wanted to be able to tell if their satisfaction was different based on their age or gender or diagnosis, and especially their wheelchair type. And the instructions are similar. The 3 different examples are similar, where we needed to give an example of how to answer in different situations. Rate your satisfaction with how your left shoe fits your foot. The first one is low. The shoe is short and narrow and it hurts my foot. The next one is very low. I have no shoe, but I need one. And the third one's NA. I don't have a foot. So how my shoe fits is completely not applicable. Here, each question is asking them to rate their satisfaction. And again, it's centered on the user's body. So it can be answered by almost any user for almost any wheelchair. Hips, buttocks, and thighs, the parts that support back, trunk, and head, parts that support calves, ankles, and feet, parts that support arms, shoulders, and hands. Rate your satisfaction with the parts a helper uses to push your chair, because almost everybody needs help sometime. Casters, the smaller front wheels and their attachments. Main wheels and push rims, wheel locks or brakes. How the wheelchair fits your body. The wheelchair color and appearance. Of course, really it's the users that can answer that question. Nobody else really knows what they would like in their wheelchair. How the wheelchair maneuvers in small spaces, across surfaces and obstacles. We had to really work with the wording here, how the wheelchair helps your ability to maneuver, because the wheelchair wasn't maneuvering all by itself. It was the user's ability to maneuver. Get in and out of the wheelchair, desk and table activities, sit upright and see others. We were trying to use language that was easily understood, and as you can see, the language is less technical than in the WIC, the Wheelchair Interface Questionnaire. Travel in vehicles is public transportation, and your overall satisfaction. We added the overall satisfaction because sometimes people had other things they wanted to say, and that gave them a chance to do so. Here's an example of data. This one was for a teenager with spina bifida who was in one of those folding hospital transport chairs that are often inappropriately used for long-term wheelchair users. It's not really intended that. It's a short-term transport chair. And as you can see, he was quite unhappy with many aspects of function. A few of them he was fine with. And if you look, his comments explain why. He gave the back a relatively high rating because he doesn't really need it. He doesn't need a lot of back support. Transferring, it's easy to come in and out of. And transport, to go in a car was easy, but almost everything else was poor. And his overall comment, it's ugly and big and hard to get places. In another study, we did a whole set of people using hospital transport chairs, and we're able to provide data that strongly gives evidence that what everybody knows is correct, that these transport chairs are not suitable for long-term use. The users are not satisfied with them. Here's a data set just to show you the kind of data set you can get from this. This was from a test-retest reliability study in Kenya, and you can use all of these things as ANOVA factors, and then here's the numbers themselves. Here are 2 papers validating this particular outcomes measure. I'd like to tell you about the aspects of wheelchair mobility test. We've looked at some other measures. We looked at the wheelchair components questionnaire, which answers, is it broken? The wheelchair interface questionnaire, which gives a wheelchair professional a voice to say if it's appropriate for the user. The wheelchair satisfaction questionnaire, which gives the wheelchair user a voice to say are they satisfied with it. And now we want to ask if it actually rolls in common environments of use. We've called it the aspects of wheelchair mobility test because obviously our short outcomes measure, which is intended to be able to be completed in a timely way, doesn't cover every possible environment of use. We're just asking, does it roll well on commonly encountered environments of use? It's available for free download with its instructions. Unlike the other ones, which are just questionnaires, This one has a data collection aspect where you're actually doing a 4-minute timed roll test on a measured track. So it requires setting up a measured track and measuring the distance someone rolls in 4 minutes. And then it also has a questionnaire aspect where you get a follow-up question from the user. So there's a smooth track, there's a tight spaces track, which is 4 chairs placed along a wall at a certain distance apart and from the wall, and a rough track. And because this one is intended to be used in a repeated measures way, where you're comparing the person to themselves to reduce the impact of individual variation, you can do it on the same rough track. So they'd roll in one wheelchair type and then another. And that works well. You can get some feedback. In fact, some studies have indicated that watching a person use a chair and getting feedback from them is one of the most important aspects of making certain a chair is prescribed correctly. So you can do that in a natural rough surface, or if you're doing a bigger study and you want to use a describable rough surface, we've developed modular rough surface units based on a description of how rough a surface is and how you can make a model of that from studies at Pittsburgh. That's available. The directions to make that are available online. Here is the very simple data collection sheets. And as you can see, we've just asked for participant ID and track length, number of laps, additional distance, and total meters. So you do need a long measuring tape or a survey wheel to measure how far they rolled. You measure the track and then you measure how much further they go. And then you get a question where you're going to ask the user how hard it is. Rate moving on a rough surface, and they'll rate it and give you a comment. Rate moving on a smooth surface and in tight spaces. So that's basically what you're going to do. Each roll test is 4 minutes, and then while they're resting before the next one, you get them to answer the question, and you wait till their heart rate has returned to their original non-exercise heart rate before doing the next one. And if you're going to compare different chairs, it's good to give them time between the chairs so they're not more tired. This shows the power of the repeated measures or within subjects, where you have a group of people rolling in a Hope Haven kid chair, APDK chair. The very strong ones went like blazes and went a long ways in both chairs, but they went less far in the APDK chair. Same with the weaker ones. They didn't go very far, but less far in the APDK chair. So data that would have been obscured or not showing if you had just taken data is made clear because it's been done in a way that it reduces the impact of individual variation. So repeated measures ANOVA reduces the impact of individual variation. Here's another study where the secondary students we were working with at Joytown in Thika rolled in 4 types of wheelchairs over a period of a couple of weeks. And you can see that there's their ratings for these 4 people and these 4 wheelchairs, and here's the distance they traveled. Here's some comments that would explain why they thought it was hard. We were able to give feedback with a similar study to the Hope Haven kid chair. And one thing they noticed that it tended to get stuck on rough surfaces. That sparked the development of the B-line wheelchair, which is 3-wheeled and easier to roll on rough surfaces. Here are 5 studies. Again, this has been validated, construct validity and test-retest reliability, and it's been used in studies that indicate its high discriminatory validity. So we hope you'll find these tools used singly or altogether helpful in your practice, both in larger studies and especially to support evidence-based data that will facilitate the replacement or repair necessary for a wheelchair user. The wheelchair components questionnaire, is it broken? The wheelchair interface questionnaire, is it appropriate for the current user? The wheelchair satisfaction questionnaire, are the wheelchair users satisfied with it? And the aspects of wheelchair mobility tests, does it roll well? These studies have sparked positive change. Here's some of the different wheelchairs we've had in our programs. The publications and conference presentations are available at our website, www.atcatalyst.org, under resources. And it's also sparked program development with our partners in Kenya. Our goal is to enable improved wheelchair provision. We hope you enjoy using these tools. If you have questions, please feel free to email me. Contact is available through our website. Thank you so much.